gray river of doubt between my head and my heart. They say seeing is believing, but I only see myself reflected in the currents of the great unknown. I need a savior to carry my head and heart on.
All right, well, we want to welcome everyone back to this post-worship conversation among some of the pastors in the Leesburg area that are preaching together this sermon series on wrestling with doubt and finding faith in the midst of it. We're praying that this podcast will be an opportunity for us to come together to share our thoughts on the subject, maybe an opportunity to hear some of the things we didn't get to say in our sermons, hear from preachers, some of the things that you struggled with or that you enjoyed sharing while you were preaching. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about heaven and hell. And so we're going to start off the conversation with what I like to call the missionary with the flat tire problem. It's the idea that you've got a missionary who is going to share the good news of Jesus with someone. The missionary gets a flat tire on the road, and that person dies before they're able to hear the good news. What happens to that person? So I'm going to invite you guys to share your thoughts.
I think I can start because I come from a country that only accepted Christianity 130 some years ago, and we have a history of 5,000 years. So what happens to all these people who died before that missionary? 4,800 years of people. And that's a question that we often receive a lot as we are talking about Christianity and maybe in that effort of proselytization. I always start by saying, I'm not God, so I can't answer your question. Maybe it's my way of getting out of that, the complexity of it. I don't understand how God who is compassionate, God who is loving, would say just because you didn't listen or hear the good news and you didn't have an opportunity, would reject that person from God's eternal kingdom. I do not believe in that kind of God. And I know God is love and God is willing. So there's a way I just cannot articulate how that's going to be. So it's really up to God and not to me. And using it as a weapon of saying, because you rejected, you're going to be in hell. I also walk against that. It's really up to God who decides that, not us. And when we talk about heaven and hell, I think there's a lot of the people, Christians have used that tactic of us sitting on the throne of God and being a judge, whether someone is going to be in that kingdom or not.
So just curious, one of the terms that is often thrown around in Christian world is it's a term called universalist, meaning that everybody's going to go to heaven, that God's love, God's grace covers everyone. It's sometimes a questionable belief. Is that something that you've ever dealt with people questioning you about whether or not you're a universalist or not in that kind of answer?
I do have to say there may have been some thoughts about that in my struggle. I'm not saying that I am a universalist, but at the same time, I see it, and whenever I'm asked with that question, I say it this way. When the missionaries came, not only that they brought Jesus or the gospel, they also brought medicine and education. Yeah. So one of the things that the missionaries were doing in Korea was building hospitals. Whenever someone has a cold in Korea at that time, our remedy was getting what you call a soju. It is one of the strongest liquors that we have in Korea. And hot pepper, mix it together, drink it up, and have your body sweat out. That was our remedy, right? But when the missionaries came, they actually brought medicine. So that hot liquor, the strong liquor must have worked before the missionaries. When the missionaries came, we started to have, of course, it's not Tylenol, but I'm just going to say Tylenol.
Yeah.
And for me, Tylenol worked. And in our history of trying to, because having Buddhism, Confucianism, Christianity worked like a Tylenol. So I'm just sharing what had worked best for me. And I don't think by sharing what had worked best for me disregards what had worked for someone
Previously.
else.
Yeah.
Does that make me a universalist? Maybe. Or does it make me a exclusive? Maybe so. So I'm trying to walk in this gray area where
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to name here that not all Christians are of one mind on this.
Oh, certainly. Not all pastors are of one
Oh,
mind.
absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I think sometimes we fall into that trap of saying you have to believe this or you're not a Christian. And hold on, let's pump the brakes there. There's actually a wide range of thoughts here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about just that vision of the missionary in Tyre and not getting to the village, but also for a lot of us in our personal lives, we have friends or we meet people who are from different faiths, and so the question kind of lies on us. Well, this person seems really nice and kind, and so it's like, what about them? What about their status? What's going to happen to them? And I think we, as Methodists, do have can look back to John Wesley as he talked about prevenient grace, and that was the grace we can summarize from 1 John 4:19, which is God loved us before we ever knew who God was, and so God's grace is there, and yet I think there also is a degree of tension too. I think there's a call for us who are Christians to live out the faith by practice, but also to share the good news and to proclaim it as is spoken in Romans 10, and to live out the faith and practice it and share it so that people can have a greater understanding of God's love and His understanding in the world, and living out the gospel truth, the good news.
Jonathan, as you were talking, I was just reminded of the scripture passage of Jesus telling the parable of the two children, and the one that says that they weren't going to do it, and then goes and does it, and the child that says that they'll do it and then didn't do it, and Jesus responds with, which of these did the Father's will?
Mm-hmm.
So much of our proclamation of what we believe is not what we say, but what we do in our action. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if a lot of the way that we profess faith is not necessarily saying I believe in Jesus, but by saying I love you, or I care for people that are different than me. Mm.
Yeah, Mother Teresa.
Are they not doing the Father's will?
Yeah. As Mother Teresa, the saying, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. I'm pretty sure that was attributed to Mother Teresa.
But the question, and it goes on to probably some of the questions that we don't talk about heaven and hell a lot, is because we had saw the people who were saying it, and in a way that was very condemning and very exclusive, that it kind of shooed away a lot of people. So in our reaction, what we tend to do is we try not to talk about it, and we put an emphasis on love, which eventually is the same way and is doing it in an action, but we are so kind of scared or kind of tense whenever I believe that we're actually, by talking about what heaven is right now, we're also tense as well, because I don't know if all of our understanding or definition of heaven may be the same. So how can we,
or more so even what is hell?
Yeah,
I mean, not just heaven.
Yeah.
We don't I don't know about you, but even having that word go off the tip of my tongue is unusual.
It is.
Because we don't use it.
So that's where I was going to see if we can transition and ask, what would heaven look like for you? I'm not talking about shape or form, but what would be the concept or understanding that we have about heaven?
I think for me, I've got a couple of thoughts on this, but for me, one of the things that I think about with heaven has to do with, on the one hand, the unending praise of God, right, and the being united together with God the Creator, right. But on the other hand, you also think about, when we talk about heaven, we also talk about the people that we have loved and lost and what that means, and the comfort that we find in feeling like they are someplace good, right? These people that we've loved and that have had an impact on our life. And so I think for me, one of the pieces of this that I really appreciate when we talk about particularly the afterlife, because, conversation of heaven isn't just limited to the afterlife, right? We can talk about how we bring that here on earth, like the words of the Lord's Prayer, on earth as it is in heaven, right? But when we talk about the afterlife, I think about the words that we say in the funeral service, when we talk about committing someone back to God, and that act and that moment of deep grief of being able to say, you know what, I can't put my arms around them anymore, but I know that they have been loved and received by another.
Exactly.
And so it's not just that they're gone, it's that they're received and they're held. And to me, that is one of the things that I have always found to be the most comforting and the most compelling about the idea of afterlife in general.
I find the words that you just shared about, particularly like Revelation. I know in funerals, I oftentimes go straight to Revelation 21, because that's where it talks about heaven's going to come to earth, and there's going to be the new creation. And so heaven's going to change, earth is going to change, and that gives me a real sense of hope for the future, what heaven's going to be like, and what spending time with God forever and ever is going to be like. And that is the kind of joy that I look forward to in heaven.
So for me, it is to see God face to face, where I can only see a glimpse of God here. And actually goes on to what we can also see, that making heaven on earth as it is in heaven, or making what heaven is right now, is also about, if we're able to be in that relationship with God, if we are able to see God here, this can be heaven, versus where a complete absence of God can be hell. So when people say, my life is like hell, because they don't have that relationship, I truly believe them that they don't. They live in hell. It's not that it has brims of fires and has a everlasting thirst. It is really that absence of God, and so therefore, the long story short, for me, heaven is where I see the fullness or overflowing presence of God, where I've been searching for. How heaven is formed is not really for me, it's not my problem. Whether it is gold roads or whether it is a room that Jesus had prepared for me, that form does not really matter when I'm going to use that word that I just showed you all, merged back to the Creator. And that's, for me, heaven. So that actually leaves me to make heaven here on earth as well.
I've often preached when I've been preached about the purpose of Christian discipleship, or the purpose of the Christian life, and I've often shared with the congregation that I pastor, and at first they were kind of like, "What?" I was mentioning that the purpose of the Christian life is not for us to get to heaven. That's not the purpose. Nowhere in the scriptures does it say that the purpose is for us to get to heaven. The purpose, as I understand it, is the end of Revelation. That is to bring heaven to earth. That's the purpose. And we do that by living more and more like Christ, because heaven is being in the presence of God, fully,
full presence of God.
And I think one of the neat parts about Revelation's picture, or how we understand heaven, is it doesn't. Yeah, there's trees and streams and
golden
roads,
Yeah.
and but primarily above everything else is light. Is Christ is the light.
And if God is the magnificent light, wouldn't all these gold and diamonds will fade away, right?
Absolutely.
I very much agree with you, Josh, and I really appreciate the way that you said that, because I think that that really helps to put into perspective for us how, what we read in Scripture, what we come together to do in worship, the reason that we covenant together as a community, how that actually is a calling on us to live out our faith, and to not just be Christians on Sunday morning, but it's actually all about, am I a Christian when I'm, driving to school in the morning? Am I a Christian on the sideline of a soccer game? Am I a Christian when I'm doing my grocery shopping? It's all about how I am going about my day-to-day relationships, how I'm existing in the world.
Yeah.
So with that, I think it's good for us to segue onto the last question. What if there's no heaven? I'm going to put a
Wouldn't
what
that
big what if?
wouldn't that be like saying, what if there's no God? I mean, we just talked about heaven
Yeah,
being
right,
God.
right.
So
Yeah.
I think we talked about that in the very first week. What if there's no God? What if there is nothing? Well, I still like the way that I lived. I still like the way that I loved. I still am happy with this understanding of who Jesus is and the teachings that Jesus taught. So if there's no heaven, then there's no heaven.
Yeah, I don't think that there's something we can't answer that, right? That goes back to this thing about doubt and certainty. Like there is no way that I can give a certain answer on that, right? But I'm okay with walking through life not knowing.
I see it as a leap of faith, and I just seeing all that God has done as really, or in my own life and through the work of the Spirit here, I'm counting on all that God is doing, and I just really just place my trust that He's going to fulfill that vision, and yeah, I honestly I don't care about the golden roads. I mean, just being in the presence of Jesus, I think some days I feel like I just merely I don't even really deserve to be, at His feet in dirt, maybe just be ashes for Him to tread upon. But I trust that He's going to reveal all things, and so I have to say that I have to stick to believing that there's a heaven.
So the way that I heard it once was it's like a 50-50 bet. That there is a heaven and there may not be. But probably piggybacking onto what you said, let's say that of course we bank more on that there's going to be one. But let's say that there wasn't. And it's a big if. If anyone is trying to charge me for that. It's a big if. I would say I still like the way how we are trusting on God as we are walking, whether it's a God or a being, or the way our life is lived with trying our best to love others. Yeah. I think our life is still worthy, even though there may not be. So if we're going to have a bet, why not bet on that there is going to be, and live as if there is going to be that depends on how do we love and how we share and how we act and how we live. Everything is depending on that. I think by the time that in that small chance, it's not 50, but in that small chance that there isn't, wouldn't we still be able to say our life was well lived?
That's well said, RJ. I think that this is probably the episode where we've not been of the same mind the most. I think probably in most of our episodes. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But I also think that, again, it's important to say that's okay, right? Not every Christian is in the same place. Not every pastor is in the same place. We're all searching for Christ. We're all wrestling with these questions, and we're all seeking to live that faithful life where we do bring those aspects of heaven down to earth,
Down to earth, yes.
to be with us and with the people that we love and in our communities.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for listening to the podcast today. We hope that this has been helpful to you, and we hope that you continue to join us in our services, and we will talk with you again next week.
Great.
Awesome.